What happened where Arizona would just release DeAndre Hopkins with no strings attached? What happened?
Oh, Rich, Arizona had trade talks surrounding DeAndre Hopkins for months. They were not able to move that contract, which would have paid him $19.45 million in 2023, nor was Hopkins willing to rework that contract to the degree that he would have had to facilitate a trade. Now, there was a point, you mentioned Odell, a couple of months ago where there was momentum toward a Hopkins deal potentially getting done. Then what happens is DeAndre Hopkins sees that Odell Beckham Jr. signs for $15 million fully guaranteed, upside to $18 million. After not playing all of last season, Hopkins then begins to think, well, I can't possibly take less than that. And with that decision went away any chance that they had to move the contract. So at this point, Arizona decided to release him in part because doing it before June 1st allows them just to take the entire bullet now. They eat $22.6 million in dead money. They actually save a little over $7 million in 2023 cap space because Hopkins' cap number was close to $30 million. They also obviously save that $19.45 million in cash that comes off the books right now. You go back to the draft, you look at everything the Cardinals did, Monty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon in their first year together in Arizona, they were amassing draft capital for 2024. They were trading back in the draft. They obviously got the guy they wanted in the first round, Paris Johnson, even after making some of those maneuvers. But once again here, Hopkins will be completely off their books in 2024. They got all kinds of draft capital. No one is ever going to say that it's a total rebuild or anything like that, but it's pretty clear, especially with Kyler Murray being injured and in all likelihood not playing a good chunk of this season, that Arizona very much is putting all their eggs into the basket of being ready to make big moves for 2024.
But to not get a single ounce of draft capital back for him, and it's because the contract was something that Hopkins refused to rework, and thus get him the free agency that he currently has, and teams read that writing on the wall and weren't going to, allow the Cardinals to get off the hook. Is that why he gets released? I still can't believe they couldn't even get a single draft choice for him, even a 7th, 6th, 5th. Really? Nothing.
A team would still need to take on the contract, or else have Hopkins willing to rework it. Once that Odell deal got done, it changed the entire headspace for DeAndre Hopkins and the landscape of trying to get a trade done. That's not to say a lot of this, Rich, as you know, it's driven by the economics. It's driven by what teams are willing to do in terms of their cap space. They're committed to a player who, let's be honest, over the last couple of years has missed a substantial amount of time due to injuries. Again, so is Odell. Odell had a couple of ACLs, and but we saw down the stretch of the 2021 season, what he could still do. He got a contract that I think surprised a lot of people in and around the NFL, but the Ravens were willing to pay a premium at a time that they were trying and eventually did get a deal done with Lamar Jackson. Whatever took place here, and again, there were teams interested. There was at least one trade that was, I never want to say close, because until something is done, I don't think that there really is a close, but there was certainly momentum to getting something done. Once Hopkins decided he wasn't going to take less money than what Odell got, it just made it impossible to pull off a trade. And now what happens is the Cardinals have announced this, which means that immediately teams can call DeAndre Hopkins directly. He does not have an agent. He does have a business advisor that he works with and helps him on contracts. Something could happen quickly here, or DeAndre Hopkins could find out that nobody's willing to pay up to that same level of $15 million hard. And if that's the case, then let's see how long he potentially waits here before choosing his destination.
All right, so DeAndre Hopkins, Tom, tweeted out that he was walking through a farmer's market in South Carolina when he received this news. So I guess as he's choosing out a nice head of broccoli and his phone's ringing, who's calling him in the farmer's market? Tell me the market that he's currently in football-wise, Tom.
Well, I think it's easy to put together the pieces here in terms of the types of teams that would want to make a move for DeAndre Hopkins, who, regardless of how much money he ends up getting, he's not going to come cheap. It's going to be a team that's a contender. It's going to be a team with a good quarterback. The Bills have certainly been a team that people have spoken about as a fit for DeAndre Hopkins. It does make a lot of sense. And now that you're not in a space where you're having to give up a pick on top of it, maybe there's more financial flexibility. The Chiefs are another team that's a logical type of a destination, given their receiver movement over the last couple of years here. And I would certainly anticipate there's going to be some other teams that are going to pop up, as this thing moves forward here, potentially get in the mix as well. It's fascinating to think back, Rich, too. You go back to 2020 when the Texans traded DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals. And at that time, I think it's fair to say that there was shock among people within the NFL. There was a ton of criticism leveled at Houston for how you could, give up DeAndre Hopkins. Well, if you go back, and again, this is all revisionist history, and we have the benefit of hindsight here, but 3 years later, the Cardinals gave up $57 million for DeAndre Hopkins. He was banged up each of the past 2 seasons, missed a lot of time. Texans got a second-round pick out of that deal, and they used the money they saved on Brandon Cooks, who, believe it or not, had more catches for the Texans over those 3 years than DeAndre Hopkins did in Arizona. And that's not to say that DeAndre Hopkins is not a phenomenal talent, but, there are reasons that GMs are reluctant in many cases to make, certain types of deals, especially when you have a superstar player who becomes available. You always have to ask yourself why. And there were a variety of reasons that DeAndre Hopkins became available. Arizona took a big swing to bring him in, and even though he did have some productivity there, I think it's fair to say that it didn't work out how anybody would have anticipated.
So would looking at teams' cap space give us an indication of the market, or that means nothing? Teams can just rework deals to make sure Hopkins gets in the fold, and a bunch of veterans or players might be willing to talk turkey with general managers on that front right now.
Well, teams increasingly, Rich, over the last couple of years have been really aggressive adding void years. So you could do something like, let's use $15 million just as the baseline here. You do a $15 million signing bonus plus $1 million base salary for DeAndre Hopkins. You add 4 void years on top of it. He's on a 1-year, $16 million deal that only counts about $4 million on your cap this year. There's different ways that you can get around this, and I don't think the cap space is the driving force. I think as much as anything, it's opportunity. DeAndre Hopkins is a high-volume type of a player. He is a strong personality, too. Even though he comes across as very laid back, you're going to feel DeAndre Hopkins when he's in the room. He's very talented, but he's been banged up the last couple of years, and he's frankly not as young as he was a few years ago either. So I think it's going to be a fairly short list. Obviously, a lot of teams will poke around on it and see what the market is here. But I would anticipate this is pretty targeted in terms of who's going to be in the DeAndre Hopkins mix, who's going to be willing to pay that type of money to bring in that specific player, not upend kind of the overall dynamic and chemistry of your offense, and have a chance to win right now with him at a time that he's going to want to make sure that he's getting money up front.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.